Somalia shakes again as an al-Shabab attack hits the capital. A car bomb explodes in the heart of Mogadishu, destroying a school and a nearby hospital. What will it take to defeat one of the world's deadliest terror groups? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is security in Somalia. In less than a week, al-Shabab has struck twice in Somalia with deadly force. The latest blast rocked the capital, Mogadishu, killing at least 8 people and injuring dozens, detonating a car bomb outside a school during rush hour.
At about 7:30 a.m. local time, as the school students got into their classes, a big explosion rocked the whole area. You can understand how it feels when many students, mostly children, came under attack as schoolrooms collapsed and other key lab materials smashed into pieces. At least 7 children were injured and all were rushed to the hospital.
Well, al-Shabab quickly claimed responsibility, saying it was targeting a UN convoy. The bombing is the latest in a long line of attacks by the terror group. Since 2010, the al-Qaeda affiliate is believed to have killed more than 4,000 civilians, both inside and outside Somalia. Here's a look at some of their deadliest attacks. In 2013, al-Shabab gunmen stormed the Westgate Mall in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, killing 67 civilians during a siege that lasted 4 days. 2 years later, the group struck again in Kenya, killing 148, mostly students at Garissa University College. And in 2017, al-Shabab carried out the deadliest terror attack in Somalia's history, with 587 people killed when a truck laden with explosives was detonated in Mogadishu. But while recent attacks haven't been as large, they have been increasingly frequent. Take a look at this. From car bombings to jailbreaks, from military bases to police stations, al-Shabab has committed at least one mass casualty attack almost every single month this year. Until October, when the government and AMISOM, the African Union's peacekeeping force for Somalia, claimed they dealt the group a crushing blow by retaking their stronghold in the lower Shabab. But last weekend, al-Shabab struck again with the targeted killing of Somali journalist Abdiaziz Mohamed Guled. He'd been highly critical of the terror group and was killed in a bombing along with 2 others as he left a restaurant in the capital. Well, finding a way to defeat al-Shabab is a priority for Somalia, but can they do it alone? AMISOM has been assisting Mogadishu in its fight against al-Shabab. How effective it's been, though, is up for debate, but it's supposed to withdraw from the country nevertheless by the end of this year. There's also political instability to factor in. Tensions between the president and prime minister have only added to the problems. In April, the two clashed when President Mohamed extended his term by 2 years. But more recently, they found some common ground and agreed to speed up the election process. Still, instability is rife, and many fear al-Shabab is exploiting it. Now, in spite of the continuing attacks, Somalia has largely fallen out of the news headlines in recent months. So to look at what's behind that and what can be done to improve the security situation on the ground, I'm joined now from Garowe, Somalia, by Ali Warsame. He's the former education minister for the state of Puntland. And in Oslo is Mohamed Husein Gaas. He's a director at the Raad Peace Research Institute and co-author of Political Islam in Somalia. Thanks both so much for being with us. Well, al-Shabab claimed responsibility for Thursday's attack with absolutely no shame, and we have witnessed, the sheer volume of the violence that they've inflicted in Somalia over the last year alone. Ali Warsame, sum up the state of security right now in the country.
Actually, the situation is getting difficulty, and the reason is that Somalia is going to kind of the national election, and whenever there is some sort of uncertainties in terms of the future of the country, in terms of the outcome of the election, such things happen. It's not the first time. It happened in 2016 before the election. It happened in 2012, but the continuation and the gap that's coming from the security side is really worsening, because elections are almost 2-3 months away from now. So the situation is scary, and the situation is not stable at all.
So Mohamed Husein Gaas, has the political wrangling, the failure to hold a presidential election, allowed, Al-Shabaab really to strengthen off the back of that instability?
We could say it has given an opportunity Al-Shabaab to intensify its activity. And the reason is they wanted to stay on the spotlight and say, here we are still relevant, and a powerful actor to reckon within Somalia. But as my colleague in this panel said, actually, whenever there's an election, the security situation becomes a bit complicated, and there is some sort of a trend of intensification of attacks by Al-Shabaab.
More than relevant, though, there are questions as to how much structure there is to Al-Shabaab inside Somalia. Many say they actually administer entire districts, that they have their own infrastructure that can collect taxes effectively. I mean, how much does just that undermine the government overall and give Al-Shabaab some sort of legitimacy that is quite dangerous to the kind of democracy many in the country want to see?
I think this is very important question that we need to address if we have to find a solution to the security challenges created by Al-Shabaab, but also enhance the overall stability and progress of Somalia and the Somali state. Number one, I think we often forget that Somali government is not able actually to get the kind of military hardware it needs because of the UN Security Council sanctions. And the other thing is AMISOM has not been effective actually in dealing with Al-Shabaab, and it has overstayed its mandate. Then when you have a situation where African peacekeeping mission is there, around 20,000 of them are in Somalia for the last so many years, but then they are not able actually to effectively, degrade Al-Shabaab. And the government is struggling with the underfunding of its forces, but also institutions because of it relies on donors. And then we see, a situation in which the average Somali citizen actually wonders, whether he can have the security from state institutions.
Very quickly, I want to talk more about AMISOM in particular, but expand on what you were saying about the UN Security Council hindering Somalia's progress.
I think it's interesting because of, when this sanctions or arms embargo was imposed in Somalia, it was in 1992, at the height of the civil war in Somalia. But, time has changed. Now you have institutions, federal and regional institutions and a government operating. Then when you still renew, those sanctions year in, year out, I don't think you are helping Somali National Security Forces or the defeat of Al-Shabaab.
Okay.
But at the same time, the paradox is still we continue to fund AMISOM with $1.5 billion, and then not allow the Somali National Security Forces to have the necessary military hardware they need to deal with Al-Shabaab and have a control over the security
I
of the
want to
country.
get Mohamed's opinion on that. And also the general question is, how much do Somalian security forces themselves really need to be strengthened in order to fight Al-Shabaab seriously?
Actually, I agree with Mohamed for several points, but I will go back to the first question, which was Al-Shabaab are becoming resilient. And the reason they are becoming more resilient is that they are generating enough funds to run their operations. They have underground forces, and they have connections within the communities that they control. But as we said, and I agree with Mohamed 100%, Somali security are underfunded, they don't have the kind of support that they need in terms of the equipment and hardware. And I think the whole international support is going through AMISOM. I agree with him. AMISOM is outdated now, and they were supposed to be, all these funds to be channeled to Somalia. In terms of Somali security services, there is a lapse in terms of the intelligence, in terms of the effectiveness, in terms of the coordination with the national and regional levels. And when there is no working together in terms of the security sector, they can be penetrated and such kind of atrocities can happen.
And why is there this failure to work together? Is there still perhaps too large an issue with clans, with tribalism in the country? Is there a failure then to hold political cohesiveness as well, as long as that persists?
I think the main obstacle is the coordination and cooperation between federal government and federal member states. You know, Shabab always, as they written in their books, live in the anarchy. The more anarchy there is, the more chance they can get to infiltrate. The main thing was that Somali government at the regional and national levels was not able to articulate the kind of the strategy and coordination they have to have. And the second thing is that there was a squabbling in power. Somali government already, passed its mandate. It was supposed to hold the elections in February 2021, and now nothing is coming out, and we are in December 2021. So that shows you it weakens the legitimacy of the federal government. And in addition to that, there is another risk coming in, which is the drought coming in Somalia now, which is very effective. And all in all, I'm feeling that Somalia is left for itself, and the funds were channeled to AMISOM.
So as you underline the fact that there is a lack of unity among the workings of the security forces, and there's also a lack of resources. Mohamed was noting the fact that they still can't technically get the weapons they think they might need to better fight this battle. It also goes against, it makes it even more difficult to fight a group like Al-Shabab, who some describe as one of the wealthiest terrorist organizations in the world. I mean, how much harder is it to fight, Mohamed, when Al-Shabaab is getting the sorts of financial resources, ill-gotten means, of course, but I mean, how much harder is it to fight? And please also tell us a little bit more about what kind of financial resources they're getting and how.
I think I have to say one thing before I move in to answer that question. The issue is not whether there is some disagreement between the federal government and regional states. That issue is a political issue, and I don't think, in a way, it's a very determinantal to the effectiveness and operations against Al-Shabaab to have some fruits. But what is more important is actually the fact that the security forces in Somalia are underfunded. AMISOM has been there for the last few years. It has not been taking any offensive operations. It is just the Somali National Security Forces and also regional state forces of the regional states that has been taking the offensive. And another element or issue that has been learned from the AMISOM state in the country has been they are not effective actually in fighting Al-Shabaab in rural area. And when Al-Shabaab largely exists in rural area, and you are not willing actually to fund or to lift the arms embargo or sanctions on the Somali security forces, I don't think that is very helpful in even talking about the defeat of Al-Shabaab.
Okay. So Ali, if they're ineffective in fighting, particularly in rural areas, doesn't that also connect to the lack of intelligence that you've been citing? That because Al-Shabaab is powerful in rural areas, the security forces can't get the trust necessary as well of the local communities because they're scared.
Absolutely, you put it rightly. One of the key issues is that you cannot maintain security by having soldiers in everywhere. Intelligence and intelligence sharing plays the main factor for defeating any insurgency, let alone Al-Shabaab, which are very strong in terms of the many regions and inland. I think intelligence services have been in the politics, They mingled with the political sides. They were used in different ways by the political squabbling in the country. And instead of focusing to at least bring a security cooperation between all players, they are also part of the problem now in Mogadishu and in the election issues. I think we need Somalia never ever have a strategy, very clear strategy at all levels to combat Shabab. And I think that's what's now haunting every side of the government. But security forces, I think they are taking a big toll in terms of the failure.
Okay. Ali, let me stick with you for a minute. Or go ahead, Mohamed.
I respectfully disagree with him on the notion of Somalia had never come up with a federal or regional status with a clear security plan. We know very well that Somalia has tabled a plan called Somali Transitional Security Plan Initiative. And that plan clearly outlined, the security handover of AMISOM to the Somali government and regional, Somali federal government and regional states by the end of this year. But then we have AMISOM, which is, going other way and actually not collaborating with the federal government and also regional states. And we had a situation where the federal government of Somalia and the African Union Peacekeeping Peace and Security Council has been at odds recently, actually, culminating with the expulsion of the deputy chief for the AMISOM. So
Okay.
this is telling, actually. The fact is that, in a sense, AMISOM at times has behaved as an occupational force rather than a force that collaborates with the government and regional states. And this is what we need to address.
Okay.
If we have to get stability, if we have to, defeat Al-Shabaab, we have to get this to be understood by the UN Security Council, the African Union, and the AMISOM.
Let me let
it's
Ali.
the only Somalis that can defeat Al-Shabaab, not a foreign force. Look what happened in Afghanistan.
I was just about to say, let me get Ali's comments quickly on what you've just said, and then I want to move on to exactly that issue.
Yeah, I just respect Mohamed for his assertions, but I will tell you one thing. You can have 1,001 plans, but if these plans are not put in execution, are not agreed upon, are not executed, they are just plans. I think there is a lot of plans, including Somali national architecture, but that has never materialized and has never worked. That's my comment on it.
Okay. You brought up Mohamed. Ali, I wanted to ask you this first. We talk about, the U.S. tactics in cooperation with the security forces in Somalia. Do you think they've helped or hindered Al-Shabaab? Because now we're hearing more and more people say that Al-Shabaab has taken a lot of inspiration from the Taliban.
Well. Is question for Mohamed or for me?
For you, Ali. We're hearing a lot more about how Al-Shabaab has been watching Afghanistan very closely and how they've now taken inspiration from the Taliban because they see U.S. behavior in Somalia as similar to what it was in Afghanistan. And if they lost there, Al-Shabaab feels very much empowered to go forward very pragmatically in Somalia now.
If I'm hearing you well, Somalia situation and Afghanistan is 1,000 miles apart. Somalis, Taliban was always a national Afghanistan intelligence. Al-Shabaab was always an amalgam and part of the international Al-Qaeda network, which fights to spread its message across the globe. So they are totally different in that sense. But in they share one thing, which is anything that happened in Afghanistan and emboldened Taliban can also spill over to other places like Somalia, and it can also help Shabab to legitimize their presence in Somalia in defeating the invasion of the infidels and something like that. Okay,
Mohamed, go ahead.
I think there is one issue here. If AMISOM and other actors are there to help Somalia become stable, that has to trickle down to the security of the average Somali citizen in the country. But that has not been happening. And as that has not been happening, and there has been serious incidents provoking public outcry and anger against the AMISOM, I think AMISOM has not been effective, at least for the last few years, and it's not going to solve the security situation in Somalia, even if it takes 100 years.
Yeah,
so what we
AMISOM
need
is leaving very soon anyway, so past AMISOM.
What we need is actually a comprehensive strategy that includes elements of reconciliation or a dialogue. Whether what happened in Afghanistan can happen in Somalia, that's a question for a debate and discussion. I don't think that can happen in Somalia for reasons relating to the fact that Somalia is a federal state, meaning you have a federal state and institutions, but also you have regional states and institutions that have their armed forces. And maybe Mogadishu can fall for Al-Shabab. But I don't think Jubaland or Puntland or Somaliland could be controlled by Al-Shabaab. It will take a very long time. And also, a lot of Somalis, they really want, largely, Somalis, they want a functioning state. Mm-hmm. They want security. They want everything that other citizens want. And, as long as we are able to support, the plans that Somali authorities put on the table, I think that's the only way we can defeat. And that has to include, lifting sanctions on the armies on Somalia.
Okay.
Also trying to fund Somali security forces until the country is able to properly stand in its feet.
Okay,
that's
so
the only way.
Ali, let me ask you, is there any space then in Somalia for effective foreign assistance, especially in the realm of helping build the security forces?
I think that chance is there, but as I agree with Mohamed, there is obstacles for that chance. As long as we emphasize on AMISOM and channel all the funds, Somali army will always struggle. That's one issue. The second issue is issue of corruption in Somalia, which was always maintained by international donors that Somalia mismanages funds. The other thing is the political instability, whereby we are still waiting elections that was supposed to happen almost 6 months before. And finally, as I said, there is a lot of plans, but there is no clear, executable, agreeable, and maintained. I agree with Mohamed also in terms of the armies embargo. It's too late, and it's getting its toll on Somali forces. But one thing is missing here. Somalia cannot work with a fragmented army. We need all-inclusive Somali National Army. If you have cantonments there for certain forces of forces, another is other place, different trainers, different cultures, you cannot compete. We need all-inclusive, all Somalis National Army which can defeat Shabab, and only Somali forces can defeat Shabab.
If that fragmentation, though, Ali, if that fragmentation remains that you're talking about, what happens to Al-Shabaab? Does it become ever stronger?
I think they will be, but they will not be everywhere. As we say, Somalia is the federal government. They may overrun certain places, but to capture Somalia is impossible business for Al-Shabaab. They can make atrocities, they can kill hundreds, but I don't think they will have that capacity to overrun Somalia in general.
Do you fear, though, that they will further flood over Somalia's borders and threaten neighbors as well?
Yes. Shabab are, threat to Kenya. We already know the cases. They are threat to Uganda. We already know it. Ethiopia, which is now going under a civil war, can be also another hotbed. They did in Djibouti. They did everywhere. They always proved their resiliency. But I think if we come up with a strategy of written planning, well-funding, well-training, all-inclusive national arming, shared intelligence, we can defeat the Shabab.
Okay. Mohamed, quick final words.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think the bottom line is only Somali soldiers or Somali security forces can defeat Al-Shabaab, not AMISOM, no other foreign arms. Yeah.
And what about politically, though? Will anything happen if politically Somalia doesn't get
Politically, Somalia has proven, or Somali authorities has proven that they can come over at any time their disagreement. We have seen last year, we are seeing it now, where the elections are going slowly despite the disagreement in previous months. So, I think with the new, after the election, with the new government in place, I think all we need is political actors to sit together, the regional authorities and the federal government, reach consensus about the modalities of the Somali security forces. And after that, lifting the arms embargo funding.
Right.
And I think in short
Mohamed,
period we can.
That will have to be the last word. I'd like to thank you both so much for being with us on this edition of the Newsmakers, and thank our viewers, of course, for tuning in as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter at @the_Newsmakers, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.